Powered by Riverside.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to My Black Book Journal, powered by Act Justly, Love Mercy, and Riverside. Excited for another episode with you all today. I have joining me Trey Ferguson, who is the author of Theologizin Bigger, Homilies on Living Freely and Loving Holy. Trey, how are you doing today?
You know, I'm doing fantastic. I don't have too much to complain about. I'm excited. I think maybe one other time in history been able to hear the actual intro music that was playing in the podcast. You know, usually they add that in post, but that music was wavy. I'm feeling real good right now.
Yo, I feel that I used to do it in post-production as well, and I'm like, you know what? Let's just throw it on in the interview, man, so we can all be vibing together as we're getting ready to go into this conversation.
Yeah, man. Your reward in heaven shall be great because you blessed me, and I know that right there, you created. You're not a cul-de-sac of blessings. You a conduit of blessings. And because you blessed me, more blessings coming your way right there.
Hey, you know that's what the Bible says. It's better to give than to receive. So I'm grateful I can give you that, my brothers. You all. So like I said, Trey Ferguson wrote the book Theologizin Bigger. So he's here today to talk to us about his new book that released in January. Really excited about having him on the podcast. I was sharing with him that I initially met him through Substack, which is a platform I jumped on last year. I didn't know anything about, but I was listening to something that Dr. Jamar Tizzy was talking about. He was encouraging young black authors to get on Substack, to really get in that community. And so I'm excited about being a part of that family and that environment that Substack is creating. But I'm really excited about you all having the opportunity to hear from Trey and to learn more about his book. So Trey, let's go ahead and jump into it. Your book, Theologizin Bigger. Before we get into it, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to this point in your career.
Most definitely. I, like a lot of black people in the United States of America, grew up in and around church, right? And the black church tradition, all that stuff, I was really in there. Talking choir, marching in through the processionals every now and then, white glove, all that type of stuff. And so that was my life up until one point. It didn't have to be anymore, right? Like I remember the day my mom asked me if I was going to church rather than telling me to get ready to go to church. And I thought it was a trick question. I really did. Because I was an adventurous kid. Sometimes I like to test the waters. Said, "Are you going to church?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Okay." And she left. And that was that. And so, like a lot of people, I kind of fell away from some things when it was no longer forced upon me, when I didn't have that drug problem no more. You know, when you get drugged to church all the time, I didn't have that. And so I wasn't really serious about, like, I still called myself a Christian. I still believed in God. I still knew the Lord's Prayer and all that stuff. But I wasn't really taking my faith seriously through most of high school, through a great deal of college, until I met a young lady who asked me if I would consider going to church with her. She wasn't churched like I was growing up. She was curious about things of faith and knew a little bit of my history. And because I liked her, I found her attractive, and I wanted to spend more time with her, I went to church. And it did two things for me. Number one, it let me know the woman who would eventually become my wife. And then it also reconnected me with my faith in some ways. But because I spent some time away from the faith, like in what is proverbially known as the streets, right? I was out here in the streets, you know, and I was in college in a very, very aggressively, one might say, secular environment. And so I've been confronted with things that did not all the way jive with the faith that I had inherited and the faith that I grew up practicing, right? And being reconnected with my faith and having this language of skepticism at the same time, it kind of reanimated my faith. It made my faith more authentic to who I was in the world that I was traversing in. And so what you see in Theologizin Bigger is really the synthesis of that journey of what do we do with this faith that we've inherited in a world that is at times hostile, often skeptical, and altogether curious about the faiths that we've inherited, or sometimes not even curious about the faith that we've inherited. And what I wrestle with there is what is this faith for? That's why we got the Baldwin quote in front of it. This concept of God is of any use to us, right? And really it's about living freely and loving wholly for me. And so we have this concept of Theologizin Bigger, and that's where this book comes from. It's a story of, or in part at least, a story of this journey of faith and the world around it, you know?
Yeah, I feel that. And so in Theologizin Bigger, let's just stop and pause there, right?
Let's do that.
When some people see that, they're like, okay, one, let me just lay this out there. Theologizin Bigger has the dopest cover of any book I think I've ever read.
Okay, I'm glad you said it. You're the first person to acknowledge that, and I'm tired. I don't know how many of these interviews. It's probably been a dozen interviews already, and nobody has had the courage to speak the truth that you just did. But brother, let me tell you, the scream I scrumped when I first seen that cover, because I ain't even mean to interrupt you. Can I tell a quick story about the cover?
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right, cool. So when we're sitting there thinking about this, and because I took the route that I took in publishing this, I had a lot of control over a lot of different processes that a lot of first-time authors don't have. We could talk about that a little bit later, about the path that I chose. But I know my publisher and other people had ideas about what a cover could look like. And I was like, okay, yeah, none of that really feel like me, but I guess it's a book. And then at one point, I woke up, and it was about 4:45 in the morning. And it was one of the rare occasions where my wife was actually up with me. I don't know why we were both up. We were like, yo, what if we did this for a cover? And we started talking about this because one of the things that people it'll make sense when I tell you, I had to play music a lot of time while I was writing. And a lot of that music ended up being lo-fi stuff, right? And so the cover actually reflects that vibe. And then we started talking about elements to go in the cover. So if you look at the cover, we got a laptop, and there's a Bible, and there's all sorts of books, and all of the things that actually go into how I interact with my faith and the process of theologizing and everything make their way in there. And like the cityscape behind it and all these elements. And I put all of that on a vision board, and I sent it away, and the artist sent me this cover, and I was like, oh my gosh, it is perfect. I don't want to see nothing else. So yeah, I appreciate you. You're the first person with the courage to talk about the fact that this is the best cover in the history of books.
Yo, the best cover in the history of books, because it actually, like, when I saw it, I'm like, well, that speaks to me. Like, I can identify with that, because if you're a creative, or if you're a preacher, I think in our day and age, like, proclaiming the word of God is an act of creativity, and you're inspired by the living of life. And so, like, I think sometimes we make it just spoke to my like setting as well, right? Like this curated setting of I'm looking out, thinking about my city. I got my books, I got my laptop, I got my iPhone, and I'm in my element, right? And I'm like, yo, this is how I feel. So it was dope, and it spoke to me, man. So congrats on the cover of the book. Before we even jump into the content.
That's what I'm talking. I'm in the right podcast right now, man. Like I'm in the right place. You see me, man. Oh shoot, this is. Whew.
Yeah. So hey, I loved it. I love that you all. So hey, get the book, read the book, and then set the book out on display so people can like, ooh, what's that?
Hey, but you don't know, I haven't even done a good job promoting it or whatever, but you could actually buy the cover. Like, you could buy a poster of the cover. It's on my website, pasttrail5.com/shop. And you could, because it's so dope. I was like, nah, somebody gonna want this thing, but whew. All right, go ahead.
pasttrail5.com/shop. I'm going there after we wrap this podcast up, because I got posters and all that around me, and I'm putting it on my wall. So,
okay.
My wife will see a charge on the card after this podcast.
It's not going to be a big one, because I'm for the people. It's not going to be a big charge. I'm for the people.
She's going to appreciate that when she see that charge, then, so that'll work. But yeah, I love it. I do love it, and really thank you for. It spoke to me, right? Like, before I even knew what the book was going to be about, when I saw the cover and I saw you revealed it on Substack, I felt like, yo, that's for me. Like, I feel like I identify with that, so I appreciate it. But theologizing, right? Like, so break that down for our audience. Like, when you talk about theologizing, like, I know a lot of people are familiar with the term theology, but when you say theologizing, what exactly do you mean, and what can people kind of expect when they think about that term and engaging with your work?
So you kind of just hit on it a moment ago, and I don't even think if you, I don't even know if you noticed it or caught it. You talk about how like preaching to you is a creative endeavor, right? A lot of times when we think of theology or theologians, it sounds real academic. It sounds heady and distant, right? And by most definition of the word, I am a theologian. I identify as a constructive theologian. Some people put me in a liberation theology camp. I don't run from that label. I don't wear it myself. I'm a constructive theologian as opposed to a systemic theologian or systematic theologian rather. But all of that stuff sounds nerdy. It sounds like it's stuck in the, and one of the commitments I made to myself as I was going back to seminary for the second time was that anything that I do, like whatever I'm doing, has to be able to help the people I was called to serve. One of the things that I endeavor to do is make things plain. So to whatever extent there is something healthy or helpful found in academia or in church history or whatever, how do I make this plain for the context I've been called to? And that is a little more active than just studying stuff, right? Like you actually got to engage the different parts of the brain here, left and right brain. And theologizing, when I turn that into a verb, it sounds a little more active. Now, some people think I made the word up. No, theologizing, to theologize, that's an actual word. But no, when I say I be theologizing, I'm describing the active portion of it, this creative endeavor. I've been really digging. Rick Rubin put out this book called The Creative Act. And it's a lot of like inherently spiritual aspects to it. He's not a Christian by any stretch of the imagination, but you can kind of peep that. And he talks about like pulling things from the source is what he calls it. Right. And theologizing is doing that. We're pulling things from the source. It's just that we may or may not have a different idea of who or what the source is as we're doing that. But really, no, I'm reaching out into the things and the one who is beyond me and finding points of connection. I'm reaching into eternal realms and trying to create perceptible things in the temporal realm, right? Like I'm trying to make the forever things plain. And the best way I can think to describe that is theologizing.
Yeah, I feel that. So walk our audience real quick through your process. Like you sit down, you want to write this book, and who do you have in your heart when you're thinking about putting this art, right, out into the world, this message? Like who would you say when you started this process and when you ended this process, you would say, this is who I have in mind and this is what they'll take away from it?
Yeah, the easiest answer to that question, like I know exactly who I wrote this book for. I wrote this book for me. I wrote this book for the 17-year-old me who knew I believed in something, but wasn't sure if I could find it in an actual community of faith. Right? That's who I wrote this for. What I discovered, why this becomes a book as opposed to just a blog post or as opposed to just a series of tweets that it started as, is that this is an experience that many people from many different walks of life can relate to. I hadn't realized. One of the demographics that is like largely composes the people who follow me on various social media platforms, middle-aged white women. And that has always shocked me and confused me because I don't really talk. I don't do a lot of code switching or nothing like that. But I realize that there is an experience that is easily to understand in wrestling with what we have inherited and how to make it make sense in the world that we're in today, right? So whether you are a 17-year-old black teenager or you're a middle-aged white woman or you're an Asian American who is 34 years old or whatever, I can identify with this. I was raised a certain way. We were taught to believe certain things, and the world doesn't always match up with the expectations that came with that inherited faith. And so I felt free to be authentic to myself. I felt free to speak to that 17-year-old version of me while recognizing that it would help more than just that 17-year-old version of me.
Yeah, I feel that. So you deal with some heavy topics, right, in your book. And you're dealing with things like deconstruction, like understanding what the gospel is. I love the chapter "Straitjacket Faith," right? And actually, I want to quote something that you said from it, and it's a long quote, but you say, "In the hands of the marginalized, faith heightens sensitivity to injustice. In the hands of the oppressed, faith motivates people to chase liberty. Faith is a balm to the heartbroken, to the needy. Faith is the path to provision, to the privileged. Faith unbridled looks foolish. Untamed faith is a threat to the powerful, and so it must be tamed. The best way to conquer a people is to separate them from that which liberates them. Separate a people from their land, and you control their autonomy. Separate a people from their family, and you control their community. Separate a people from their language, and you control their communication. Separate a people from their faith, and you control their imagination. Right? Like, I loved that, and it really spoke to a theme that I saw as I was reading your book, like this thought of the autonomy that we have, the sense of community that we have, this shared communication that we have, and you bring that out because you don't shy away from, like, I mean, you said you don't code switch, like you don't shy away from who you are, and that comes shining through as I read your book. Like, for a lot of people, that can be a foreign thing of having that authentic voice as they're writing, being unafraid of what people may think of them. Where did that come from? And you hit on this in the book. Where did that come from you, that sense of kind of wholeness and identity?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have parents who, like, everybody think their kids are special, right? And my parents were no different in that regard, but like they meant it. Like it was like, oh, y'all are special, right? And so part of me always had this complex. I was like, oh, I don't have anything to prove. Like I know who I am. And because of that, I've always been confident in no matter how I talk, you're gonna smell what I'm cooking. Like you're gonna understand. I don't need to say it in this way for you to understand what I'm saying because I'm an effective enough communicator, right? What came from my parents affirming each of their children was the idea that in whatever package you are valuable, you are intelligent, you have something to offer. And so I don't feel compelled to perform respectability. I am respectable. I don't feel the need to perform intelligence or intellect. I am intelligent, right? And I was affirmed from both parents that way. And my dad is one of the most brilliant people to this day, the most brilliant man that I've ever met in my entire life. And he was an immigrant who did not graduate high school. He got a GED, was actually enrolled in an Ivy League university. He went to Columbia, didn't graduate there. And he didn't feel the need for that validation. He was like, oh no, like, I'm not stupid, right? so he stayed in somewhere as long as he felt like being there. And I've always kind of had that vibe about me. Like, oh yeah, I don't need that. I don't need the degrees. Like, I got a couple of them. I don't need them. Like, you know what time it is when we talk. And because I was fortunate enough to be raised by people who affirm me in that way, like I feel comfortable talking this way, right? Like, I can go and speak in front of a Mennonite congregation in the middle of America, and I might throw a suit on just so I don't offend them, but I'm gonna talk how I talk. I might switch up some of the references. I might not drop lingo that's gonna lose them, but I don't feel the need to perform or totally switch up the way I talk. No, you know what time it is.
You, in your book, well, I kind of want to ask you a question. We talked about who your book was for.
Yeah.
But when you finished your book and you published it and it released, how did writing this book change you?
That's a great question. And I think one of the things that finishing this book did was it humbled me in a way that there are only so many things that you can control in the process of like writing and publishing a book, right? I can control what goes into the book, or at least the first manuscript, and because of the way I structure things, I got to control a lot. I got to control the cover in ways that some authors don't. I got to control some of the editorial choices or whatever. I can control that. But after a certain point, you are not in control anymore. You are releasing it into the world, and then it's up to people to decide how far the book goes, right? We can do things to influence that, but we can't control it. And it sort of reminded me, like I have a child who will reach the age of majority this year, and it's freaking me out. because I've done so much to pour into this child and to shape certain things, but I realized that, oh wow, at a certain point, there's literally nothing I can do. I can influence it or whatever, but I have to release it. And so releasing the book, when I was done writing it, is what you asked me, like, oh, how did this change you or whatever? It made me realize the limits of what I can and cannot influence. And I can pour everything I have into this, but at a certain point, I literally got to let it go. And if I use some Christianese language real quick, and then I let go and let God at a certain point. And that's one of them things that helps you to realize your own finitude. To really have to learn to trust not only the God of creation, but the people of creation with whatever comes next in the fruit of your labor and the fruit of your love. Does that answer that question?
Man, that answered that question. I mean, it's a question that I think is different for everybody who goes on that journey. And I think what you said is so true. Like, you were changed in releasing control, and I think that's real, because we often try to manipulate the outcome sometime in this space and in this world, and it usually only hurts us, and it costs us our integrity, and then it costs others as well. So I appreciate you for sharing that.
Yeah, it costs you your integrity, but it also costs you your peace and everything. Like, when I'm sitting there, because I'm not a control freak, I don't think, but there's certain things, when I'm out of control, I'm more anxious. Right, when I have to trust something. But when I realized, like, wait a second, there's literally nothing I can do about this. I did what I could, right? And then accepting that, whatever, like, it'll humble you, and hopefully if you can play it right, it'll also bring you a level of peace that maybe you hadn't experienced to that point.
So, two questions. One is, or question, comment. I love your writing because it's very slick. I'll say it like that. Like, almost like this, It's like, dang, I feel like I just got hit a couple times and I didn't even see it coming. Like your chapter, there was an ark in Kentucky, right? Like we don't do that here. Like, I mean, I love how you intro it and then launch into a broader theme from a cultural standpoint. Like, where did you learn? And I feel like it's very engaging. And I've never heard you preach, but I'm assuming you probably, when you're speaking, when you're preaching, you probably come at it like that, which seems very relatable. How did you learn to take these cultural things, use a sense of humor and a little sarcasm to bring that point home?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that you even related it to preaching, because that's really the answer. I'm not that clever. I have a format. Like, if you were to break down my book from a literary standpoint, you'll notice that there's a pattern that goes on. There's an illustration that then goes into something else or whatever. If you look at all of my sermons and you break them down, there's only so many ingredients. There's an antithesis, there's a thesis, and then there's a synthesis. I'm going to do it. If you give me 5 minutes to preach in a text, I can give you something serviceable because I already know where I'm going with it, right? Mm-hmm. What then occurs, and what maybe makes people think I'm doing something original, because what I'm doing is not original. Who I am is original, right? Mm-hmm. And what I was taught when I was preaching is that preaching is God's word through your personality, right? Mm-hmm. And I approach writing this book the same way. Like, okay, I'm going to present truth. Some of them may be uncomfortable, but through my personality. And because I am naturally got, like, humor is a coping mechanism for me, right? I was joking at my father's funeral. I got in a motorcycle accident. I was joking in the hospital bed, right? Like, sometimes there are times that I've been in therapy to address this or whatever, but I'll use humor to avoid dealing with my pain at times. I use humor for everything. I'll use humor to break the ice. If I'm uncomfortable, like, we gonna laugh about something. And it just felt natural as I'm talking about these things. And truth be told, if you look at how this thing works, even from a business standpoint, the only reason that anybody's interested in publishing anything I have to say is because whatever audience I've already cultivated. And most of those people have come to connect with me because this is what they've come to expect from me. Like, Trey's going to make us laugh, and then at times he will make us think. That's what you expect. And I felt as though an original version, an original outline of this book, I think I was kind of missing that mark a little bit. I was being a little too heady. I wanted to take people straight to the theologizing part without bringing my personality into it, you know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a lot of times it's just staying true to who you are. I don't know if everybody else could write this book, and that's not like an insult, but like if you not a dude who's just joking all the time, like I play too much. That's true. I play too much. And so if I didn't play it all in this book, it would have been somebody else's book. I would have been ghostwriting for myself at that point, you know?
So right now in our current landscape, there's a lot of black authors, and I interview a lot of black authors around their work. And there seems to be more of a market for black people to tell their story, black Christians to tell their story, and to tell the stories that they want to tell from their perspective and their vantage point. What I've seen with that, there's a bit of a saturation that's also taking place. So when you were surveying the land and you were thinking about writing this book, what did you want to do differently? And then you said you took a different approach to publishing. Can you tell us a little bit about the approach you took, why you took that route, and what you feel like the culture around black Christians publishing works that they want to, like, is right now in the industry? That's like 3 questions in one, so I can break those down if you want me to.
Yeah, let me try and get to so the first one as opposed regarding what I did differently or what I attempted to do differently. A lot of the books that are coming out from black authors, and I don't mean this to sound like an insult, but a lot of them center white evangelicalism in ways that I wasn't really trying to do. Right? And I acknowledge it because it's an elephant in the room. I would have felt like it was malpractice if I didn't address the fact that white evangelicalism is a powerful force in our theological imagination. And I need to be clear about that. The reason that I feel that it has to be addressed is because it's not as though there's some distant cousin that we don't recognize. Like, no, we agree on a whole lot. It's not that different. As a matter of fact, you can walk into a bunch of black churches and receive preaching and theology and doctrine that is entirely undistinguishable from white evangelicalism. They're just going to acknowledge the reality of blackness more. You're going to have black people singing the hill songs instead, right? That's that, like that, and that's true. You can do that in a whole lot of churches, but I didn't like. And because the other part of it is that's not really my story. There are people who have had tangos with white evangelicalism that I really haven't had. The closest I came was a stop at a seminary. But other than that, no, I've spent my entire faith journey within black church spaces. And so I didn't want white evangelicalism to operate or to be in the driver's seat of my story or to take up that much space. And I don't know the degree to which I was successful in that mission, but one of the things I was trying to like, oh no, I don't want this to be a book about how white Christianity has harmed me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things that I was trying to do differently. When it comes to publishing, black Christian authors, right? Nonfiction authors in general, black ones in particular, black Christian nonfiction authors, just layers on top of that, are not going to have a very fun time in the business of publishing. There's not a lot of money out here. They're still trying to figure out, when I say they, I mean the publishing industry. I'm not talking about the man or anything like that, even though most of them are the man. But the publishing industry hasn't really figured out how to market us. The ones that have been successful, often you'll notice that most of their book covers, regardless of the topic, center around their face. Because they're photogenic and everything, like they're really trying to figure out what to do with us, what to do with our voices. And there is a degree to which the more familiar you sound to white audiences, the more success you will have, which is one of the reasons, like, part of the reason that the cover be the face, aside from some people being photogenic or whatever, is felt like, hey, look, here's a book that you can agree with, but it's by a black guy. We're not racist anymore, right? You know, and I'm not trying to like throw the easy shots, but like, no, this is a business at the end of the day. This is a business. And one of the things that we will continually run into is if you do not already have a ready-made large platform, it will not take you seriously when it comes to compensating you for your work. You will not receive a real, like, serious advance offer. Your royalty rates will be low, not insultingly low. like that's how publishing works. I think 10, 12 points of royalty is typically normal. And what I had to ask myself is it really worth it to put in all of this work? Because regardless of the size of my platform, I'm going to have to put in the work publishing this book. It doesn't matter what house I go with, like unless they give me a major nearing 6-figure advance and need to make sure that they recoup, I'm going to have to put the work in. Is the money that the publisher is prepared to give me from selling my own work commensurate with the amount of work they're going to expect me to do in selling my own work? Because at the end of the day, the publisher is making the majority of the money when it comes to selling my work. They're the people who found the printers, who found the editors, who found all of that. And I had to ask myself, like, okay, is this worth it? And in most traditional publishing structures, for me personally, the answer was no. That doesn't make a lot of sense at all. And so what I did was I tried to find a situation in which, it's funny, I consulted so many different people, and the majority of the black people I consulted said, you need to self-publish, right? And the reason is then you're not cutting a publisher in for the work that you're going to have to do anyway. And it made sense. The problem is I know myself, my own executive drive. I was like, no, I'm going to need some help. And there are companies you could pay that will show you how to do the work. You pay them a one-time fee and then you self-publish. I was like, oh, no, I need some level of accountability. I would love to go through a traditional publisher and get paid self-publishing rates, but that's not really like doable at the level that I find myself. I was also honest about where I am in terms of platform size and how much weight I could throw around. But what I found was a hybrid publishing solution wherein a publisher would still do all the things that a traditional publisher would in terms of distribution, in terms of finding editors and designers and proofreaders and like all of these things. And but I enter into taking the risk with them, right? And so typically you'll have to pay a certain amount and then your royalty rate would be a little bit higher and you won't get an advance. Problem is, like, I ain't gonna lie to nobody, I don't really have it like that. Like I don't have that money sitting around. So one of the things that I did that was relatively unique, I started a crowdfunding campaign. I said, look, y'all, I have a vision for this book right here. This will be my first book, and if y'all believe, like, I would love you to support right here. And I raised a bunch of money, and it came to the publisher, it was like, I will fund this, I need you to handle all of this stuff, and we'll split the money like this. Right, along these ways. And I won't put all the contract details out there. Yeah. But what that did is, number one, I don't have an advance to earn back. Like so from the very first. And I literally rethought like the business of how I'm going, like what is it that I'm trying to do? And for me, as much as I believe in the content of this book, which I do, what was as important for me was trying to provide another path for writers and aspiring authors in my situation. Now, I can't be out here doing crowdfunding campaigns every time I want to write a book. Like, it's going to look funny. But for the first one, it made sense. It was an intro. And so, like, I've been fortunate enough to be able to have conversations with other people about how we could possibly do this, what this looks like, how sustainable that is as a model for other people, what the next steps would look like if I wanted to go back for book number 2, things of that nature. And so, as important as showing up differently within my book was, I wanted to show up to the negotiating table differently. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty proud of that. Like I'm as proud of that as anything else here.
Yeah, that's what's up. That's what's up. Thank you for sharing that wisdom and your experience with our audience. I think it's we got a lot of people who are creatives that listen to this podcast. A lot of writers, a lot of people who really want to contribute and don't always want to go the traditional way, and sometimes those traditional doors seem closed, and so that ingenuity that you even shared, I think is something that we're going to continue to have to explore if we're going to do something different, right, and tell different stories and think about who we're centering in those stories as well, because I think you said that well. Like, who are we centering in these stories? And are we just centering them because we are desiring a platform or because we want to be authentic to our individual and unique voices? So thank you for sharing that. Trey, I've enjoyed it. 2 questions, then you're out of here. First is, where can people get the book? Where can they follow you? And then you drop where they can get the merch. But just drop that one more time to make sure that people can know where they can purchase your book and where they can follow your work.
Oh man, that's a great question. I appreciate you. So your hotspot's gonna be pastHave.com, pastHave.com. all of my social media handles are linked on that platform. You can find me on, I'm never going to call it X. So you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Threads, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. All of that stuff is going to be linked at pastthetrail5.com. You can subscribe to that Substack that you were talking about. The Sunday Move is also linked at pastthetrail5.com. If you want to find various links to of places to buy my book, you can do that at pastthetrail5.com. The merch is also going to be at pastthetrail5.com. If you want to go to the book specifically, you don't feel like going to my website and doing all that stuff, anywhere you buy books, really. You want to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you want to support an independent bookseller, you can go to bookshop.org and they'll cut something off. If you already have a local bookstore that you like to support and patronize, you can go to them and tell them you want this book. They will fill the order for you. And it's a real book. It's a real. I know I took a non-traditional path, but where you find your real books at, you can find my real book, because I wrote a real book, and I like saying that. So that's why I said it 4 times just now. I said it 3 times. I wrote a real book 4 times now.
I feel that you like, no, you can get my book wherever you get books, right? Like, it's not just, you can get it on Amazon, but you can get it wherever you get books at. I feel you.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon sells most of the books in the world. That's where you can find mine there, too. But if you one of them people, like, you like to drink with your pinky up, you don't like to go to Starbucks, you like to get a real barista who draws stuff in the top of your cup, if that's how you consume your books, wherever you get your books at, you can get my book. Yeah.
That's what's up. Last question to get you out of here. So we ask all our guests this at the end of the show. What have you read lately that has brought you joy?
Okay. What have I read lately that has brought me joy? So I finished quite a few books this week. I'm not even trying to brag. Like, the way it lined up, all my reading ended at the same time. So I want to make sure I pick the solid one.
It's all right to flex. You know, go ahead and flex. It's all good. It's all good.
I've been flexing the whole time. Like, you can get my book where you get books at. I've been flexing the whole time. I'm not ashamed to flex, but that wasn't supposed to be a flex. That was I'm gonna go with The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. James McBride is one of my 2 favorite authors on the planet, and I read all of his stuff, but he just released that book toward the end of last year, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, and it's probably my 2nd favorite book of his, perhaps. So yeah, let's go with that one.
Yo, love James McBride. I loved The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. It was different than I thought it would be. I finished it in January. It was phenomenal, but I love James McBride. You said it's your 2nd favorite. I think it was probably my 2nd. I know what my 1st is. What is your 1st favorite James McBride book?
All right, hold on. I'm going to see if you can guess right. Based on my personality, what you know about me, just from reading my stuff in the conversation, if you had to guess what my favorite James McBride book is.
I'm going to say Deacon King Kong.
You right. There it is. It ain't hard to figure out. That's it. That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one. Deacon King Kong. The Good Lord Bird is up there too. The Good Lord Bird might be number 3 or 4. But Deacon King Kong, it might be my favorite book of all time. Like, I don't recall ever laughing out loud at a book as often as I have Deacon King Kong. Like,
yeah, I love Deacon King Kong. James McBride is wild. Y'all read James McBride.
Yes. Anything you can get your hands on from James McBride. Even, I think, the sneakiest book of his is the 5 Carat Soul Band, whatever. Like, that one didn't really get as much press as the other ones, but like, no, that brother bad. Like, he's yeah.
Yo, hey, I love it. It brought me joy too. It made me feel all the feels like James McBride does. But yo, we've had Trey Ferguson on My Black Book Journal. Again, wrote the book Theologizin Bigger, Homilies on Living Freely and Loving Holy. Trey, thank you so much for being a guest on My Black Book Journal. You all follow him, pasthertrail5.com. Go to the website, get the book, buy the book cover as a poster, which I'm going to do as soon as this is over with. But make sure you all follow him, support his work. He's out here doing big things. So Trey, thank you so much for being a guest.
No, I appreciate you having me, brother. Thank you so much.
All right, y'all. Until next time, we out.